Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by two guests. Firstly, Chris Kelly. How's it going, mate? Great to speak with you again.
Yeah, well, good. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
No problem, mate. It's good to have you back on. How have things been?
Ups and downs of life again, as usual. Never quite straightforward, but yeah, still doing okay. Okay.
Good. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. As good as things can be with how Grimsby are at the moment, I'm sure. But things keep marching on as usual. And we're joined by another very special guest this evening, a sports journalist and anchor from Ukraine. I'm joined by Dmytro Dzhulai. How's it going, Dmytro? Pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very special topic today.
Yeah, we are, of course, going to be discussing FC Pripyat, FC Stroitel Pripyat. Club had a number of names. We're going to explain all about the different names and all about what the identities behind those names mean. And we're going to talk a little bit about other lost clubs from Ukraine as well. And just football in Ukraine in general. And Dmytro, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your relationship with the club? You know, obviously, as you said, it's quite emotional. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
No, I've been just working as a journalist, a football commentator for a while now. And basically, I just love stories. And these are the kind of stories that fascinate me. And of course, I understand, look, if it wasn't for the nuclear disaster, nobody would be interested in Budevelnik Pripyat right now, anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. So that's what kind of makes it special for foreigners, but also, of course, for Ukrainians, because for so many people, it was a part of their lives. And I was just taken from them in a few minutes, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right as well. There's this kind of dark tourist sort of element associated with Pripyat and the area affected by the Chernobyl disaster. And the football club must formulate a part of that, where they started.
But look, they were filing reports from the very start that something is wrong. The people are doing this wrong. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. It was a disaster waiting to happen from day one. So that's, for me, it just makes it even worse, because these people, they're basically living on a volcano. It was already active. And they were the ones who were making it active. It was like amazing. Like in 1978, they were supposed to have a security staff of 84 on the building site of the station. Mm-hmm. They had only 34 people there. So a lot of things were just simply stolen from there. And of course, it's a very typical situation for any so-called socialist country in those days. Things were stolen from everywhere by everyone. But we're talking about nuclear energy here. And it was like from the day one, it was doomed.
Just to add on that, that's something that sort of Artur and Serhiy went into, is the fact that the authorities, from the beginning, from everything, were covering an awful lot up. That was something they were keen to get across as well. It's maybe something more of its time than, should we say, nowadays, if you know what I mean, in terms of how the should we say, the Soviet Union worked. But then I presume Dmytro knows better than me in that regard. And health and safety, of course, it's certainly come on leaps and bounds since then anyway. But for it to be covered up to the degree that it was, like Dmytro said, it's quite shocking, really.
Well, as Dmytro said, by the sounds of things, and as we all know anyway, it was a completely avoidable catastrophic loss of human life and an entire region of Ukraine, which is now just uninhabitable. So,
yeah,
entirely avoidable. And you're absolutely right that it was a huge cover up, and we've seen photos and the devastation that was caused in the region in the aftermath. And yeah, it is shocking, and it's sad to say, but unfortunately, it's something that we've, not to put on too much of a tin hat, but I think we've all become accustomed to governments sweeping things under the rugs, very much when it suits them, but more often than not.
No, but here we're talking here about your own secret service telling you every year, look, this is wrong. You can't be doing this. They were naming people. They were telling what is wrong, and nothing happened. Nobody reacted to it. And of course, like the Soviet Union, like from the early 70s, it was in total complete decay. It was just falling apart. Thanks to Mr. Reagan, who came and just kind of pushed it a bit more. Yeah. But it was like that almost everywhere, in everything. So in a way, it doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me is why on earth didn't even listen to KGB when they were telling you all this?
Dmytro, do you think that's because the Soviets did not see Pripyat as the sort of flagship city for what they were looking to do with the atom grads? So was it maybe perhaps covered up in terms of not wanting?
It was the very first nuclear station at the moment that was being built in Ukraine. And among those reports, they were talking about people just not being qualified enough for that kind of work, not only in the building, but also in the maintenance of the station. And apparently there were issues before the big one in 1986. But again, they were covered up. They didn't do anything, and they didn't change anything. That's the worst thing about it for me.
Yeah, not an ideal situation at all.
No, absolutely not in the slightest. And I think certainly from the Western point of view, in terms of exposure to the Chernobyl disaster and Pripyat, is the devastation that happened during and beforehand. You know, all we know it for is a disaster. But of course, there was life before this. That there was life in the town, there was life in the city, there was life all around it in aspects as we know it as well. And I suppose that's one thing that's probably quite intriguing in a way to a lot of people about the football club, is that they see this entity attached to a disaster and they think, well, it kind of shakes them a little bit because it reminds them that there was not just a civilization, but a thriving city before this disaster happened and during it happened. And I think that's the thing that shocks people quite a lot, is that these normal things, these everyday things that we have now, they would have also had.
Well, because they're speaking to Artur and Serhiy for the blog article, they were keen to sort of point out that Pripyat was seen as a sort of like a city of the future. It was on the same level in terms of goods and availability of consumer products, and it was on the scale of the bigger cities, of the Kievs and the and Dnipro and whatnot. So yeah, it was a thriving city. It seemed to be growing, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see where or how big it could have grown today, the city and the football club. But that's something obviously we'll never know.
Yeah, and if we speak about the club, I would like to put some context into it, because we're talking approximately 1980s, from 80 to 86. And in that period of time, there were regularly 5 teams in the Soviet top flight from Ukraine. There were 4 in 1980, 1 went down, but then 2 were promoted. So from 81 to 86, and it was generally 18 club top flight. It was 16 in 86. You'd have 5 clubs from Ukraine, and 2 of them during those years won the title. In the second division, it was like 24 and 22, but then again back to 24. You'd have from 8 to 3 clubs from Ukraine playing during those years. And then the third division, it was regionalized. So Ukraine had its own zone of 23, 24, and then 26 and 28 teams. And there was a season in 83 when 26 teams played a proper tournament of 50 games. Can you imagine a league of 50 games? Then they decided, okay, that's too much. So they had 2 groups of 13 and 2 groups of 14. So that third division was like the aim for Budivelnik when they started, because they were playing in the so-called amateur competition, which meant that we had like different smaller cities in Kiev region, different, let's say, factories, different organizations that had their own football clubs. And it was a fierce competition, because everybody knows in every country, first of all, you want to beat your neighbor. You want to beat someone in the same industry and say, yeah, we're better than you. So all those people, they had kind of, it's not like, of course, club presidency, because it's the wrong word for the Soviet Union in the 1980s. All those people, they're not even working for the station. They were mostly in the building industry, and they were actually good footballers. So I've just told you, 28 clubs in the third division, just in Ukraine, a few clubs higher up the league pyramid. So imagine how many players were already involved in those, and they still had enough to play those so-called amateur competitions. And they had 6 zones of 13 teams in those. So then the winners of those zones were playing for the title in a smaller round robin tournament. So we're talking about a lot of actually good players who had a chance not to become a professional footballer, Maybe they were not good enough. They didn't want to, maybe even, but they wanted to play football because it was a big thing. I was growing up in the 80s. All we did was play football all the time. And it was a very good thing for them because, again, there were incentives in it. You're not only doing your work, you're playing football, you're being paid some extra, especially if you beat your rivals and if you're good at it. It was amazing. And all these people were actually taking, again, I think this guy was taking care more of his club than he was taking care of building the bloody station.
I can imagine. And there's actually a good book that I read towards the end of last year called Emancipation for Goalposts by Chris Etchingham. And it talks about the role of football in the fall of the former Republic of Yugoslavia. And he mentions the Soviet leagues and how dominant the teams from Belgrade were and that kind of thing. And he also mentioned as well how when teams from the different Soviet states would come up against each other, there would always be this really, really good rivalry, but not just a rivalry, but it was like in some cases it could turn quite sour, but it was also like not so much a friendly rivalry, but you know you're there, but it was like a good fixture. It was just a good contest, and it was always very, very competitive.
No, it's like when Scotland play England or Ireland play England. Well, especially in rugby, it's so much better now because Ireland is so much better in rugby than England. But it's the same thing. It's occupied against the occupiers. It's the colonies, trying to beat them at least on the field of play. And we were occupied at that time.
Absolutely. Yep.
And it was big because for my team, Dynamo Kiev, for example, Spartak Moscow was the biggest rival, and it was brutal, totally brutal. And of course we had like teams from Lithuania, Georgia, they were friends. It was a pleasure to play them, like Dynamo Tbilisi, Žalgiris Vilnius. It was totally different level of competition. It was like a healthy competition.
Yeah, exactly. No, it sounds absolutely incredible, and I love how this story's been framed because obviously with the topic of discussion surrounding Budevelnik, it's always going to be, it's a tragedy and it's a disaster and it's a cover up and there's always negatives, but the way that you talk about it, the context of football in Ukraine at that time is great. You can see the joy in your face. You can see how happy and passionate you are about it. And I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And again, it's breathing life back into this club that a lot of people would just associate with being attached to this tragedy normally. So it's just amazing. And I love how it's being discussed, as I said, from what we are normally exposed to in terms of the Chernobyl disaster. And of course it is a tragedy, but it's all very negative. So to see, kind of before how things would have been, it's brilliant, and it really shows as well how good football was in Ukraine at that time.
No, I also the thing about this club is that in the beginning they had a manager who was a former player of Dynamo Kiev, and he was connected to the Institute of Physical Education, and that meant that some of the students, like 17, 19-year-olds, were playing a bit for this club, just a few games. And I was told that actually some future Ukrainian internationals had run out for them. It's like David Beckham playing for Preston on loan. How many games? 5 he played, I think, there. But when they changed the manager, I think in 81, the whole point was about it being the local side for local players, workers and players. So it's incredible that these people, more or less local, of course, because they moved to Pripyat from different towns, but it was in the Kiev region. Most of them came from there. So they're good players for that level, and they were local, which was another important thing. Because I can also tell you, but in those days, and again, it's probably everywhere, not only in Soviet Union in those days, you had a lot of those who wanted to win by cheating, by bringing players from different regions, and those who had no connection to the side, but they were paying them extra, they were coming over, and it was like that. These guys did try to make it local, and at first the results were mixed, but they improved over a short period of time, I'd say.
So did they actually play in the amateur leagues, or did they play in the amateur leagues, I should say, in air quotes, or did they play further up?
No, they played in the amateur leagues only, and it was effectively a 4th division. It's not the same probably as 4th division, of course, in England, where it's League 2 and it's a professional division. But I'd say it was like level of, I don't know, National League North or South, probably something like that. And the aim was to join the third division, like the professional division, which had, like I said, in 86, 28 teams. And it seems like it could be expanded as well, because when you adopt the group stage format of 14 teams in a group, it's easier to add teams to those groups. And yeah, they were told that, yeah, that would be the aim. Just keep growing. And the funny thing is also in 85 or 86, they were thinking of starting an ice hockey team in Pripyat. So it was already all set. It's interesting because the guy who came to coach the ice hockey team, that never happened, eventually ended up working as administrator or whatever in a football club. And another important thing, that the nuclear disaster happened on April 26th of 86. On the 9th of May, if I remember correctly, they were about to open their new stadium for 5,000 people. And, well, there was a game there when it was still not ready. It wasn't an official opening, or they did play a game there, but the big one was there for the 9th of May. And, well, of course, it never happened.
Yeah. We've seen the images of the stadium, or the former stadium, and what it would look like now. But, presumably, well, one thing that I assumed and one thing I was going to ask was that this team was, of course, formed because Pripyat was formed and Pripyat was built. So this team was to be for the new city, or the new town, if you like. And they would have their stadium, and it was built. But it just goes to show how successful and how good this team was that they decided to build the new stadium so soon into their history, and so soon into the development of the club. It's really, really impressive.
It was formed sort of mid-70s as a local club, and then joined the KFK Championships, as Dmytro said before, in 1981 season, I believe, 1980-81, where they struggled initially. That's the more sort of nationwide amateur teams playing each other, and the prize is promotion up to the promotion up to the professional game, which Dmytro said they struggled initially with that, and as Dmytro said, eventually 1985, just before the new stadium was built, I think they finished second there, the highest ever finish, just missing out on going up to the sort of the final stages there of heading towards professional games. So they were getting there. There was gradual improvement over the years. In terms of regionally, they did very well in the Kiev Oblast Championship. They won the 1981, the 82 and 83 one all consecutive, which I think is still seen in terms of the regional game as one of the best starts ever in Ukrainian football at that level of the game. Mixed results, but certainly tangible and obvious progress, and mixed with the ambition that Dmytro was talking about, people behind the scenes. And it would be really interesting to see how far, where Pripyat could have got to, really. But obviously, we'll never get to know that.
Well, that's the thing, and one thing that I was going to ask, I assume because of the way that the league system was structured, you had the sort of Soviet-wide top league, if you like, and then that was the same in the second tier, and then the third tier was regional, but regional was the state that you were in. Would I be right in saying that it's not how like regional German football is, where there's the Oberliga for the south of Germany, west of Germany, east of Germany, etc. Would it have just been all teams in Ukraine in one division sort of playing against each other? Because if that was the case, it's no wonder they struggled with it, because Ukraine's a big country. I mean, the traveling for some of that games would have been absolutely immense.
No, yeah, in the third division, yeah, they had a group, a zone. They were called zones. There was zone that was only for Ukrainian clubs. So it didn't matter where in Ukraine were. If you were up there, or if you were relegated from the second division, you'd be playing in that tournament. Like I said, there was this glorious tournament in 1983 with 26 teams playing each other. 50 games. Now people complain about professional players complain about playing too many games. We're talking here about third division. Like, they were kind of professional, of course, even if not officially, but 50 games only in the league. And Chris mentioned those regional tournaments. They're always there, the cups and the leagues and whatever, again, because again, you want to beat your rivals, regional rivals. You want to win any kind of a trophy. And actually, there's another interesting thing about the third division that we're trying to get to, because in the 80s, I think it was 82 for the first time, when they introduced that, for the third division, well, at least in the Ukrainian zone. In your squad, you could have no more than 6 players older than 25.
Okay. Wow.
And we're talking about loads of teams here. Look, we're talking about 9 zones of 17, 15, 16, 24 in Ukraine, 19, and 17 teams. No more than 6 players older than 25, and one of them had to be a goalkeeper. But look, then you must have had in your squad 2 players aged from 16 to 18, and one of them had to be in a starting lineup in every home fixture. Basically, if you did not have that player, you started with 10 and you played with 10. And I was just like, I didn't remember that, honestly. When I was preparing, I started to do my maths, and I was like, how would you find so many young players? But, well, that was one of the things they wanted to promote as well. Of course, it wasn't the same for the amateurs, even in Ukraine, but they did have those rules in the early 80s and in the third division of Soviet football.
And did Pripyat ever play any teams from other nations, either within the Soviet Union or out with friendlies? If there was sort of international tournaments, if you like, anything along those lines, or were they just maybe too far down the divisions for things like that to be feasible?
Not that I know of. Maybe Chris found something, but
No, I go along with Dmytro. I don't think they've got that level of growth yet at the time of what happened. Maybe it's something that, like we've said before, with the ambition and the gradual growth, but maybe it's something that have reached a level that have reached in time. But no, not something that I came across in research. No.
Well, definitely not probably for the first team, because it's, again, interesting. In 86, they were about to have a major wrestling competition in Pripyat. And that was for the whole, like for the teams or athletes from the whole Soviet Union. So I'm thinking if they had the academy, for example, if they had young kids playing football there, they might have participated in some tournaments, because even when I was a kid, and we had some teams coming over to Kiev from different parts of Soviet Union playing in those tournaments. It wasn't very often, but it did happen. So maybe on that level they did. But for the first team, it was probably very, very difficult that time to play anyone from beyond this Kiev region.
Of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. I can imagine. It's just, it was a thought that popped into my head. It would be.
Oh, I can give an example. St. Kevin's Boys Club in Dublin, when they organised those tournaments, and Barcelona came, and Celtic came, and Deportivo and Lyon, and I would probably even never thought about it that it could be organised by such a small club. So maybe they had something similar. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, it's I love things like that, and I love hearing things like that. We've covered a lot of clubs in this podcast where they've kind of lived fast and died young, and they've played some incredible teams, and they're one of those clubs where you remember the name. You remember the name, and you remember them for being in maybe the first or second round of a European competition. And I think, actually, just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, there's quite a good relationship in Ukraine with a lot of Hibs fans. From Scotland, because when Hibs played Dnipro, I think in 2004.
Yeah, I was at that game. Well, Dnipro won 5-1 at home. I was at that game. Yeah.
And of course, when the Hibs fans came back, they set up Dnipro Kids, and they've been going out and helping Dnei and helping out there. So there's always been a great relationship. And trying to think, there's 2 Ukrainian players in Scotland that kind of come into my head, but we can touch on them later. I'm still obviously quite keen to hear more about this club and the people that played for them and the heights they had. But no doubt you have some memories from that game yourself, Dmytro.
It was glorious. The travel back to Kiev on the train early in the morning, and all the hungover Hibs fans with their Scottish accents trying to explain what they wanted to drink or eat in the morning. And the lady barely spoke English, because, well, she's not used to it, and it's a train between Kiev and Dnipro, and all those Scottish guys were asking for their beers early in the morning. It was glorious. It was amazing. I've always loved Scotland, mate. Just it's my thing. but whenever any Ukrainian club came up against a Scottish club, it was always something like that. No,
I
proper fans.
remember being at I think it was the Celtic and Donetsk game. Was that 2011, maybe? Champions League?
Shakhtar played them a few times in the Champions League, actually. There were a few games, yeah.
Actually, we played Shakhtar a couple of years ago when Zorya was still manager. Anyway, we'll come back onto that later because there's some interesting stuff in there as well. But were there any standout players for Pripyat? Any guys that went on to play for other clubs or kind of climb the leagues?
No, basically, I think after that happened, a lot of them were actually working as liquidators at the station. No matter what they did before, they all participated. And I think they dedicated their time to this. And after that, I'm not sure they even played football, even on that level that they were playing before the disaster struck. So I like I said, I've heard about those future internationals haven't run out, but it was the late 70s, probably early 80s, but not the guys who actually formed the team that was second in the 85. No, because I was reading the interviews and they didn't really mention the football careers as such. They probably they coached maybe later, but as players, they probably just stopped for them.
I suppose it would have been a lot different as well. And when you're playing sort of in the, again, in air quotes, amateur divisions, if it's something that takes you away from the game, and not to speak of a disaster, just anything at all, it can be quite difficult to get back into. And of course, even though you play football and you play football in the purest sense because you're playing for the sake of playing, because you enjoy it, then work is always going to come first. And if then you have to relocate or you've lost family members, then it's not going to be at the forefront of your mind, So, but I mean, one of the things that I suppose has kind of kept them in memory has been some of the football tops that have been, I suppose, manufactured, some of the replica football kits that have been made. And Chris, that was one that Charlotte kind of put you onto quite early on, wasn't it? It was the retro kits that were made. It was a company in Philadelphia, am I right in saying?
Yeah, Philadelphia, USA. Icarus Football, I believe, produced at least one retro. I mean, it's quite snazzy, to say the least. Retro concept Stroitel Pripyat shirt. And looking on social media and doing the research, it's certainly a very popular shirt. It certainly stands out. It kind of, if you remember the Arsenal bruised banana shirt, it's got slight look of that about it, but it's got a few more different colours in there as well. Yeah, it's. I think that's what brought the club a little bit more sort of popularity of late is Icarus Football bringing that out, and then people have started sort of again looking back at the club and realising how sort of special and certainly unique the story was. So that's sort of, I think, certainly contributed as to why Charlotte wanted us to investigate further into the club. And I know the shirt's very popular amongst collectors.
Absolutely. I think what was interesting for me, and this will kind of lead us on to what I wanted to ask you both next. Now, obviously, on that retro kit, the sponsor, if you like, on it is the letters for which I assume were CCCP, which was obviously the abbreviation of the Soviet Union in Russian. Now, I know that Pripyat have had a couple of names. There was Stroitel and there was Budvelnik, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
No, it's the same name but different languages.
Yeah.
One is in Russian, other is in Ukrainian.
Of course. So, but within that as well, there's obviously a lot of history and a lot of issues with identity within those as well, because some people would probably prefer to call them by one name, whereas others would call them by the other based on nationality. And there's obviously a lot of kind of maybe not so much opposing, but maybe historic troubles, if you like, that were kind of brought up through this.
Well, if you are in League of Ireland, would you call Derry City London Derry City?
No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
Look, we had a basketball club in Kiev with the same name, which used to be Stroitel, and then they switched to Budvelnik, to Ukrainian pronunciation. In the 1980s, under this particular name, they won their only title against the mighty Žalgiris Kaunas, one of the best sides ever in history of basketball in Europe. And it was accepted. even in Moscow, in the news, when they're reading the news and the sports news, they were using the Ukrainian version. It was really interesting because the club decided it. I don't remember when exactly, but 89 they won the title. So and they played like under that name, I think, for a while before that, and it was accepted. Okay, now it's in Ukrainian, it's a Ukrainian club. So of course there are people who would be saying all that thing, but in the documents you could, of course, depending on the language, you have one or the other version, but there was regional competitions, and Ukrainian was still kind of a language that was used in official papers in there. So actually back then it was like two versions of the same name, and of course people in their daily lives they use both languages, mixing them sometimes and all that stuff. But generally, I think is both names were used.
Okay, yeah. So
both versions, even better say.
Yeah. Kind of interchangeably then.
Yeah, I think in doing the research with Artur and Serhiy and Dmytro and various other people, I think it's a little bit sort of depending on where you're based. I think over where we are, and obviously in America where the shirt was produced, you get the Stroitel because that's what they were formed as initially. That's kind of what the research pages say. But for people based, shall we say, nearer and over towards Ukraine and nearer towards where the club was based, it's very much Budovelnik rather than Stroitel. So it's kind of location based. I think both as Dmytro said, both mean the same thing. I think Stroitel means builder in Russian in Soviet times, and Budovelnik is builder in Ukrainian. So it's very much location based, and obviously carries historic connotations or whatnot. So
absolutely. I mean, that's why I was curious more for the connotations. Obviously, working within and having studied and written about heritage, the issues around identity and these kind of intangible things are really interesting for me. So, it was something that I was quite curious about as well. But, of course, and as you wrote in the article, the club that was formed for a city with purpose slipped away, of course, due to the disaster, which was upsetting. And you've mentioned a few times, Chris, that who knows where this club could have gone if that hadn't had happened. But it's a huge tragedy that caused untold suffering, and understandably the club ceased to exist more or less from that day. But they were remembered quite fondly though, because in 2016, 30 years on from the disaster, they played a memorial game in remembrance of the club. Am I right in saying that? Got the dates right for that? Yeah.
Yeah, 2016. Yeah, against. Let me get the pronouncing right. I think Borodyanka, the team they were due to play.
Machina Budivnik Borodyanka. Yeah, the thing is that they were due to play the semi-final of the cup, of the regional cup, against this team from Borodyanka. And they were preparing for it, and Borodyanka team were preparing for it. And they were training on the pitch, and then a helicopter just came and just landed basically on the pitch. So the guy came out and said, "What are you doing here?" Like, "We've got a game of football." Forget about football. You're not playing. You're not playing anymore.
Wow.
So it was just like that. Imagine that you were okay. You're not a professional player, but still you're a footballer. You have a semi-final of the cup, which is important and all that. And then just let a helicopter comes and then the guy comes out and say, "What are you doing here?" And that's why they decided exactly those players who were still alive in 2016 to play in Borodyanka that game, as in memory of everything that happened.
So they could fulfill the tie. I thought it's wonderful. And
it went to penalties in 2016. So it's a proper cup tie.
Who won?
I think Borodyanka won.
I believe so.
Yeah.
God. No, it's excellent. I love. There's a lot of things here that are coming to me. It's the fact that they played a friendly to remember this club, so there's the remembrance of it, but they fulfilled the tie, which I think is just wonderful, and it's really excellent. Was the Stroitel team, was that made up of former players? Was it a select 11 just from local teams, or?
No, those are the guys who played in the team in 85, 86, who were preparing to play the semi-final. All those who were still alive, they played in that game, yeah.
Amazing. That's absolutely incredible. And I mean, obviously for the tragedy that surrounds them, there's all these amazing stories, and you guys have put it absolutely perfectly. Just capturing all the emotion and all the things around this absolutely fantastic club. I mean, is there anything else you want to say about them before we quickly move on? Any other stories that you can think of? Just anything that you'd like to add just before we finish up on them?
No, just for me, it's again this huge contradiction between what happened when we were building the whole thing, neglecting everything that should have been done, and this joy of life and football and sports and what was happening in the city. Like I said, they were doomed from day one, but they didn't know it, and that just makes it even like more painful,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah, I think contradiction's the right word. They were Pripyat seen as sort of, I believe, was seen as a stylish sort of architecturally stylish city, doing well. The city was doing well. The football club were doing well, but behind the scenes there was always this accident, whichever word's best, sort of waiting to happen to put an end to it all, to what was being built. And in the background there was this thing there that was at some point going to come along and take it all away. It all seemed very contradictory and very avoidable.
Mm-hmm. Avoidable being the key word, I think, especially, and that kind of takes us back to the start of what we were discussing. Again, bustling city, the city's doing very well for itself. It's a progressive city, and there's always this thing going on in the background threatening to take it away, and it does, which is unfortunate, but as you've both said, entirely avoidable.
Yeah, very much so. I know the city was really thriving. It was growing, thriving, and like Dmytro says, for the people in the know to know this was on its way. But it seems strange to see the city continue building in the background, knowing it's all going to be taken away. It seems a very bizarre way of looking at things. There must have been, I don't understand the reason or the logic behind it. They must have their own, people in the know must have their own reasons for that, but it's all very much avoidable and, well, very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely spot on. Of course, when the disaster was happening and all the things going on there, football would have very much been not even secondary. You know, it would be so far down the pecking order for a lot of people. But you know, the story of the club is still fascinating, and there's different ways that people perceive Pripyat now. Again, more or less as a dark tourism sort of area, as I said at the beginning. You know, in 2016, the game that they played to remember them was fantastic, and you can only hope that in the future, perhaps not in our lifetimes, football will be able to be played there again.
Yeah, I know the exclusion zone's still very sort of strictly controlled by the Ukraine, understandably by the Ukrainian government. As you say, there are that. The term I found when I was researching was adventure tourists. Is
Yeah,
behind the scenes industry there that seems to be doing quite well. I
yeah,
know. I know through the research that certain tour operators, in conjunction with the Ukrainian government, are allowed to arrange tours around the city. But it's all very, very strict. And as you say, it could well be well out of our lifetimes before that particular region, I presume, in general, returns to any form of what you consider any form of normality with the continuing radiation that's obviously going around the place.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, as well as Pripyat, are there any other lost Ukrainian clubs that come to mind, Dmytro or Chris? Either of you? I mean, I think we've discussed a couple before, but there's a few from maybe the early 2000s that have went defunct and then they've been reformed again. Are there any really from the 80s and 90s that you guys can think of or came across in your research?
Well, what happened in '92 when Ukraine became independent? Like I said, we had like generally 5 clubs, maybe more clubs in the top flight, and a few in the second division. But then those clubs, that were third division clubs, suddenly became top division clubs in the Ukrainian league, and some of them actually did well. Let's say, they became proper top division clubs over the years. But there was one, it was a very interesting story because behind that club, it was called Temp from Shepetovka. They were 2 Georgian guys, I think.
Okay.
And they founded the club in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it was the time, when in Soviet Union they kind of allowed private initiative, let's say, in business. So
Sure.
people were doing the different companies, and there was a Georgian guy there who founded the company, and then they were financing the club. And we mentioned the regional cup that Budivelnik was supposed to play against Borodyanka, but there was also a cup for amateurs in Ukraine. Well, it was still part of the Soviet Union. And this team, Temp, they were the last team to win it in 91. And then became, because of that victory in the cup, they were included in the top flight of the newly formed Ukrainian league.
Wow.
And it was just amazing because, they just were founded in 1990 and as an amateur club, in 1992 they were already playing in the top flight. And of course they stayed for a bit, and they were relegated, and slowly they were just going down, simply because the guys who were behind it just didn't have enough money to support it. And I think they actually, after 95, 96 season, just were gone. So we're talking about like 6 years of history that included a cup victory in the regional tournament and a few seasons in the top flight of the newly formed Ukrainian league.
6 years of chaos is what it sounds like, but good chaos. 6 years of fun for all those fans, some great times, constant partying. And the club that we mentioned on Dnipro when they played Hibs, is that club, did they fold and reform? Am I right in saying that? Or was it a bit more convoluted?
It was a very simple situation. The guy who owned the club, well, he's very famous in Ukraine. He says that only cowards pay their debts. And he had Juan de Ramos, a very good Spanish coach, who took the club, I think you remember that, to the Europa League final in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Juan de Ramos and his assistants, they were owed money, but the guy didn't want to pay them. And what happens in those situations, you go to FIFA, you go to courts or whatever, and they make the club pay you. So he just sold the club.
Wow.
Simply because of that. And he formed a new one. Well, he was behind it. It's called Dnipro 1.
Yeah.
Or as we call it -1 because it got this. No, honestly, I've heard some Spanish guys when they played in the European competitions call them that -1 because they think that it's a minus in the name. But it was purely because of that. He killed the club because he wanted to, because he could to. And there was no other reason for that. It's not like the club, folded because under the weight of debt and all that. No, which is because one person decided that he would do it. And that was it.
Just because of this mantra, only cowards pay their debts.
Look, I don't know. You look at I don't know. Imagine Glazer family saying, we're not paying anything. We'll just sold Man United and we'll start. But there is United with Manchester already, so it wouldn't work probably.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned earlier on, there's been a few Ukrainian players in Scotland. The two that come to my mind was, of course, Marian Shved. We spoke about. I think he's still at Shakhtar. Is that right?
Yeah, he is. Because this season he only played 21 minutes in the league, 19 in the cup, and he came on twice in the Champions League as a late substitute. So that's why it didn't register much with me. He's still there, age 26. But of course, when we talk about Ukrainians in Scotland, there was this unfortunate, for me personally, moment when Alexei Mikhailichenko and Oleg Kuznetsov played for a certain team in Glasgow. I still remember watching the derby when they scored, I think, 3 or 4 goals in the 4-2 win for that side. Now, it was painful. It was painful for me, especially it was at that period when they were winning all those titles. And thankfully, of course, Josef Venglos came and stopped that in 98. But it was painful. But yeah, they were playing for that team. And I think the stories they had about that time, because they had Gaza in the side, because they had Ali McCoist in the side. And Ali, for me, was probably the only player from that side that I always loved when he played for Scotland.
There's another player who's kind of he's certainly making waves within Scotland, I think, because he was loaned out from St Johnstone a number of times to Falkirk. I think maybe
Yeah,
Arbroath as well. Max Kucherevia.
yeah. That's
I
another
think
one. Yeah,
he was he born in Kiev? He started his career with a club in Kiev. I think it was DYUSSH 15 Kiev. I'm not too sure
yeah.
where they are in
It's like,
Ukraine.
yeah, I know that one is a very famous, like, a football school, like academy.
Ah, okay.
It stands for Children Youth Sports School or something like that. That abbreviation for that. But yeah, it's really famous because when I was a kid, we used to play against them. Yeah, so yeah, he started there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just reading there, he actually used to fly from Kiev to Edinburgh to train with Hearts, which he'd done for a period of 2 years, and then eventually signed for St Johnstone. So, I mean, fair play to him, and he's starting to come good. He's been featuring for St Johnstone quite a lot. So here's hoping his career kicks on because he's only
Yeah,
21, I think.
he got a brace against Dundee, I think, early in the season.
He did,
In
yeah. He's cracking. He's a great player.
in the league, and he's playing for the under-21s now in this new cycle. Now, what amazed me is that he only had a couple of goals in his career before, and then he goes and scores a brace.
Well, that's the thing, and a lot of people still hold the opinion that if you're small and if you're quite slightly built, then you're never going to make it in Scottish football, which just isn't the case.
No,
It's
no,
dinosaur
there's
opinions.
so many Scottish great footballers who are small. Gosh,
Jimmy
no,
Johnson, Jimmy
look,
Johnson, one
look,
of the best in the world.
I just don't understand when people start talking about it, and especially when they mention Scotland. I was like, look, who taught the world to play football? Scots. They started the passing game. They brought it to bloody South America, to Uruguay, to Argentina. And they talk about long ball and all that stuff. No, come on.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And Chris, what about yourself? Is there any Ukrainian players played for Grimsby that you can remember during your time?
No, no, certainly not for Grimsby. And to be honest with you, not. I mean, I'm sure there has been, but look, nothing that comes to sort of mind in the lower leagues. He was a very, very good player.
Made that period when Grimsby were in the championship, like early in
Yeah,
this century, was glorious because I just loved listening to all those idiots from Sky saying, "Oh, they're going down, so they're playing the likes of
yeah.
Grimsby next season."
It,
I was like, "Oh
we
God."
had we had websites and T-shirts and whatnot sort of printed with that. The likes of Grimsby, we used to. It kind of used to be a bit of a running joke. We'd love to get back to that kind of level now. It's funnily enough, the fan base we have now is far more. I mean, when we were in the second tier there, it was brilliant. We were playing the likes of your Wolves and West Broms and Forest week in, week out. But you'd still only have 3,000-4,000 home fans turn up, which was bizarre for me.
Yeah.
Now we're in the now we've been in the non-league and league bottom end of League Two in
But
sort of
look,
6, 7, 8,000.
you got the feel good factor back when you changed the owners, when the new owners came in. Because
Yeah,
the previous guy was just like, you read about him, and it's just like, come on, you can be serious.
there's a lot I could say about the previous.
Yeah.
I mean, a bit of a parody character, to be honest with you. But
Yeah.
but certainly you're right. Obviously, we're having a bit of a tough season this season, but in terms of overall, the sort of breathe new life into it. Really, hopefully, we can get back to make our way up the pyramid a bit more, back to the glory days of the second tier.
No,
There's
'cause,
actually
yeah,
there's another player that kind of came to mind, and he himself is not Ukrainian, but he did play for a Ukrainian side and then eventually moved to Kilmarnock. He played for Metalist Kharkiv, Alexei Eremenko.
oh yeah, because he's from Finland, and his brother played for Dynamo Kiev for my team in Ukrainian league, Roman, I think his name. And yeah, he was a Soviet player who went to Finland, and the kids were born there, so they represented Finland. And yeah, he played in, well, kind of played. He spent some time there. I wouldn't call it playing exactly, but he spent some time. Yeah, and then
He was a journeyman, and I think he's due to be voted into the Kilmarnock Hall of Fame. He didn't really pull up many trees in terms of a goal scoring sense, but he was a nuisance. He was box office, and he was a cult hero, and he's became a cult hero at
no,
Kilmarnock.
because the thing is, his brother was a very good player, really good player. One of those, who think on the pitch and they're good with their feet, both feet actually. And yeah, it was very, very good.
And I mean, there's been hundreds as well. Premier League, you had Andrei Shevchenko, of course. He's one of
No,
the
no.
big ones that I remember.
There was Serhiy Rebrov.
No, of course,
Yeah,
I mentioned those two, Mikhailichenko and Kuznetsov, but I have to remind you as well of Serhiy Baltachar, who played for St. Johnston in the
Yes.
early
Yeah.
90s. And he played for, I think, Inverness as well.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to this topic of Chernobyl, it happened on 26th of April, 1986. Officially, it was announced on Soviet television on the 29th. So it took him 3 days even to tell people about it. On the 2nd of May, Dynamo Kiev played the Winners' Cup final in 86 against Atletico Madrid in Lyon. And Baltachar was a part of that side. He was one of the best defenders in the Soviet Union at the time. And he won that title. And his first team abroad was Ipswich. So he went to England first, started playing there. He was, I think it was his 30s when he went there already. And he ended up in Scotland. It's interesting also that during the broadcast of that final on the 2nd of May, the commentator mentioned Chernobyl disaster in the first half. So that half was just deleted from the archives of Soviet television. So now if you want to watch the game with that commentary, it's only second half. They deleted the first half just because it was mentioned. He mentioned it briefly. He didn't turn it into something political. Nothing. He just mentioned it. It was still deleted immediately.
Wow.
No, because it was communism. It was communism.
Of course, absolutely. And
now they're lying in the United Nations under the name of Russia, and they were lying under the name of Soviet Union back then when they say nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
When from Sweden, people were saying, "Look, we're just in this high level of radiation. What is going on?" Is nothing happened.
Of course, one thing I wanted to touch on as well. I'm not sure if you were at any of the games, but Scotland played Ukraine, but 3 times in the space of maybe 8 to 12 months, roughly. Twice in the Nations League. We drew with Ukraine over in Poland, and we beat Ukraine 3-0 at Hampden. And then, of course, the World Cup qualifier, one that arguably mattered the most. Ukraine absolutely trounced us 3-1. Were you at those games at all, or did you just watch them?
I also remember the qualifiers for Euro 2008 when Scotland and Ukraine were in the same group.
Yeah.
Before the game in Kiev, I went to see the training session in Scotland where training. And the strikers were practicing their shots. And I was like 5-10 meters over the bar all the time. And there was this guy in the coaching staff called Ali McCoist, who just came on and started putting in the top corners. Boom, boom, boom. I was like, God,
this guy, this guy called Alan McCoist.
Yeah, and I immediately remember in 1996, a game against Switzerland when Ali scored his brilliant goal. And then Craig Brown, may he rest in peace, showing it's all fine because England were beating Netherlands 4-0. And he was like, it's all fine. We don't need another goal. And I was like, no, you do need another goal because, of course, the Netherlands scored.
I mean, I can imagine being a Dynamo Kyiv fan. Of course, incredibly difficult situation that yourself and all other Ukrainians are in at the moment. But again, football is likely something that's playing second fiddle to everything that's going on. Just how has it been trying to follow a team when you're based remotely?
No, the team is the club itself has been ruined by the owners for years now. So it's just like it's kind of apathy. It started like many years ago. It's just like they don't invest properly. If they invest, they just invest in the wrong players. They don't even think about appointing a proper manager for the side. It's just like, God, it's so many things. So many fans just kind of not even bothering now. Loads of people I know used to go to games, like they had season tickets, and they just decided, I wouldn't bother anymore because it just doesn't change. It's the same. And especially, well, considering what my generation remembers, like European Cup, Winners' Cup, semi-finals of the European Cup and the Champions League in 87 and 99 and all that, being competitive. And of course, it just doesn't compare to what it's not even about that. I understand that you can have a burn spell like Celtic had in the 80s, for example, had to wait for that title and all that stuff.
Mm.
But you just see people making the same mistakes over and over again.
Guys, been an excellent conversation, not just about Pripyat, obviously. You guys have got so much knowledge of the game, and the way that you managed to capture all the emotion of Pripyat into that article was absolutely fantastic. And anything else you guys want to add just before we finish up?
I just wanted to thank you guys for doing the work you're doing, because, well, we were kind of learning geography and history through football.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just clubs, countries, and disappeared clubs, the clubs forgotten. It's all part of it. It's amazing, because that's how we learn, and it's just how we realize that the football festival wasn't invented in 1992. It's not limited to 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 clubs that we're talking about, the super shit that were called Super League and all that. It's just, for me, football is, well, smaller clubs like Arbroath, with Dickie Campbell isn't there anymore. But I mean, that's just that's what football is about, and in England as well. You've got like Maidstone beating Ipswich in the cup.
Amazing. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it massively. And this is an episode we've been really looking forward to doing again. Thank you to yourself and Chris for contributing so much to the article and writing it out. I mean, we've been speaking for almost 2 hours, and not just about Pripyat or football in Ukraine or other lost teams, but just good chats about football. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. Chris, again, for kind of taking the lead on curating the article, if you like, reaching out to so many people, and Vincent as well for helping out with the stadium side of things, is something that we never even really touched on. I mean, thanks so much. I mean, is it something you enjoyed doing? Would you do it again?
Absolutely. It's exactly the kind of stuff I like to sort of get stuck into. But I like to come at it from a few different ways. When it's something of that magnitude, I'd like to, you need to get the facts in there, but I wanted to get some people who get involvement from some people who, shall we say, could feel what happened, were around or know of people around, and could give us the sort of the social and emotional standpoint of it. So I think that all sort of helps the mix in the article and helps get the story across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just wanted to thank you guys for coming on tonight and contributing so much to the article. It's been absolutely fascinating learning about the club and speaking to you guys just on a kind of footballing level as well. So thank you very much for that. Of course, thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in once again for this episode. If there's a topic related to football, history or heritage that you want us to cover, then please get in touch. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. It can be anything under the banner of history and heritage, whether it's club identities, cultures, new community clubs that have founded, lost clubs, former stadiums, or just stories from football's past and present. Get in touch with us, we'll have a chat with you, and we'll see if it's something that we can fit into the podcast or on the website. Our website is footballheritage.co.uk. It's where all of our written content lives, and there's some fantastic stuff going up there from our contributors at the moment, so please check that out as well. But for now, Dmytro, say goodbye.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I do hope we'll have some kind of proper football still in our lives.
Me too. For the football purists, absolutely, I'd agree. Chris, if you could say goodbye to all of our listeners again.
Yeah, bye. Thanks for listening.
And it's a goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.